Okay, so two people die on the same day. One's really young, has their whole life ahead of them, and dies in a tragic car accident. The other one, very old, sick with cancer, wishes to die, has no desire to live anymore. Are both of them tragedies? Do both of them bring the same emotions that you feel like both those people had a valuable life and deserve to live? The obvious answer, the one that everybody leans toward, is that, you know, there's a difference between those two people. It's not the same to have someone very young die as it is to have someone very old and sick die. The philosopher Don Marquis, in his famous paper in 1989, Why Abortion is Immoral, wrote that the thing that makes death bad is the loss of valuable experiences, valuable life that you'd have otherwise if your death hadn't occurred. And he brings up an interesting point. If your life doesn't have any valuable experiences left, then what is it exactly about your life that makes it worth living and makes it a bad thing if you die? Again, these kind of things make us think about the suffering and pain of patients, and at what point is it okay for us to let a patient go ahead and die? The law for a long time has allowed patients to, or allowed us as medical professionals to let a patient die. It's not been illegal to do that for some time. So how can death ever be a good thing? If we're allowed to let people die, what is it that makes death okay? And when can we decide to go ahead and let them die? Okay, so we've got our young lady of 100 years old here in the picture who's lighting a cigarette on her candles. Go ahead and back up. And when can death be a good thing? In cases where there's terminal illness, whenever someone has no hope of remittance, in other words, they're not going to recover. There's lots of incurable diseases. It doesn't mean that someone needs to die because of it. Depression, for instance, is basically an incurable disease, but it's very treatable. People go into remittance. They go into remittance with certain types of cancer. Someone doesn't have to die because of the chances that they'll get cancer again. Their life still has value. But when you have a patient that's terminally ill, in unending pain, and they don't have any hope of remittance, they're at a point where every day is only going to promise more pain, and the only solution they're ever going to reach is death. It's always been legal, perfectly legal, to let someone just go. But the problem we run into with that is that if you just let someone go, a lot of times letting the disease simply take its course is going to be more painful, more heart-wrenching on the family and the patient themselves, but also the medical staff. There's been a lot of research done where euthanasia is legal in Belgium and in Oregon, showing that medical staff that have to let someone simply die rather than end their life quickly go through a lot of extra trauma on top of what the patient themselves goes through. So you have to ask yourself, is there a difference between simply letting someone die and helping someone die? James Rachel, another famous philosopher, in a paper he did about euthanasia in 1986, I believe, wrote an interesting thought experiment that I'll go ahead and modify a little bit for you. The idea is you've got two family members. They both stand to inherit a lot of money if another family member's not in their way. One guy decides he wants the money now. I'm going to go ahead, go kill the other family member and get the money. He sneaks in, catches the guy at dinner, throttles him from behind, chokes him to death, lets him die. His inheritance is clear, he can get the money. The other guy thinks he can probably steal the money. If he's real crafty about it, he can get the money in kind of a roundabout way. He sneaks in the guy's house to steal it, but the guy's sitting at dinner also, sees him come in, it startles him, he chokes on the food. Well, the gentleman's a physician and could easily clear this thing out of his throat, but decides to just sit down at the table and watch him choke to death. So both people have got their inheritance, both people got them because the other person that was in their way died. Are either one of those people morally okay? Was it morally better for the one gentleman to go ahead and just sit there and watch the guy die than to cause his death? Obviously, both those people are morally accountable for what they've done, and for allowing that death to cause was no better at all than it would be to actually go in and garrote the person to death yourself. So if both of them are moral ground equally whenever they're doing the wrong thing, we have to admit that we're morally equal whenever we're letting someone die in a painful way rather than helping to cause their death. Now, this is an unprecedented ground. It's not like I'm talking about something unending. What we've got here is a lady that's suffering from Huntington's chorea. Most of you are medical people, and you know that Huntington's chorea is incurable. It takes about 7 years tops, and the person's going to die in enormous amounts of pain. they'll never lose their ability to think. They'll never lose their ability to reason. They actually stay perfectly cognate right to the very end. And they just basically die in pain in their own body. A person in that case, in a place like Belgium or in Finland, would be allowed to request of the physician that their life be ended with a lethal injection. What they call it is voluntary active euthanasia. It's literally administering a lethal injection to someone who has no hope of recovering ever, at their own request, to end their life and to end their suffering. You run into any amount of problems with that, but essentially, the main issue that people always run into is you can't take somebody's life without their permission. And you can't give permission if you're on pain medications, or if you're on any kind of other drug, or if you're severely depressed or have dementia or something that's preventing you from being cognate. The way I suggest we get around that is the way we get around it with DNRs, the way we get around it with any other advance directive. You simply can write a form, fill out something saying to your family that if you reach a certain point in your disease and your suffering's unending, that they have permission to allow you to be administered a lethal injection to end your life. To that end, and to the end that we want to be compassionate nurses and compassionate caregivers, I constructed an online petition. It's at moveon.org. You can actually go to petitions.moveon.org and look up a petition for voluntary active euthanasia and sign it. Once it gets 50 signatures, it's going to go to the American Medical Association, the American Nurses Association, the Tennessee legislature, and the Tennessee Governor, Bill Haslam's office. And the petition is to make it medically ethical, because it's not illegal, but it's medically unethical by standards. But to make it medically ethical to administer a lethal injection to a patient that requests it if they have a terminal illness and no hope of recovery. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them, but thank you very much for your time.